Friends, our scripture lesson today is taken from the first book of the prophet Samuel, chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul? I have rejected him from being king over Israel. Fill your horn with oil and set out. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons." Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears of it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint for me the one whom I name to you." Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, "Do you come peaceably?" He said, "Peaceably. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. He said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen any of these." Samuel said to Jesse, "Are all your sons here?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, but he is keeping the sheep." And Samuel said to Jesse, "Send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here." He sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. The Lord said, "Rise and anoint him, for this is the one." Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. Samuel then set out and went to Ramah. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Well, I don't know if you ever used a children's Bible when you were a kid or used one with your kids, but the thing about a children's Bible is they teach such nicely sanitized stories from the Bible, okay? And most of the gospel stories are pretty nice and short and self-contained. But when you get to the Hebrew Scriptures, when you're in the Old Testament, it's more Game of Thrones. Okay, and a lot of the stories need a backstory. I mean, last week we needed it, next week not so sure, but for this week, you kind of should have a little bit of the backstory behind what has gone on. So the backstory here is that the prophet Samuel has been told to anoint a king of Israel. He was told before. The Israelites had been ruled by judges, but they wanted a king because they were like, all the other cool countries have kings, why can't we have a king? And God said, "You don't want a king." And they said, "But we want a king." And God said, "Okay, finally, stop complaining, I'll give you a king against my advice." Never do that, okay? So anyway, Samuel anoints Saul as the first king of Israel. And then Saul is given this command by God. "Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." And they usually leave this out of the children's Bible. All right. Kill it all. And then Saul comes back to Samuel and says, "I did it." And Samuel replies, it's in the text, it's actually kind of funny. He goes, "Then why do I hear sheep?" Okay? I still hear some bleating going on. What is going on here? And Samuel admits, "Oh, okay. We killed everybody." He says, "Saul and the people spared Agag," that he's the king of the Amalekites. He spared Agag, spared the king, and the best of the sheep and of the cattle and of the fatlings and the lambs and all that was valuable. So he didn't quite kill everything. Killed every person except the king. Killed all the animals except the good ones. Now, the thing about this is that he tries to rationalize this. Like he said, we saved the best animals to sacrifice to the Lord. All right. Except here's what happened. When you hear about burnt offerings at the altar, substitute the word cooked for burnt. Okay? because that's what they did. Now, I understand some of us may have grown up in households where the two words were pretty synonymous. But what they did with animals was they would sacrifice them, they would kill them, they would burn them, meaning cook them, and then they would eat them. It became a big communal meal of the worshipers, okay? So that was what happened. And so the people were like, why would we kill? These are good sheep. These are good animals. This is a feast. Why would we do this? It's like, God tells me to go ransack Costco. I'll do it, except for like those really nice ribeyes they have in the meat section, okay? I'm going to take a few of those home, and I'm going to somehow figure out a way to tell God that I was honoring God by doing that. And that's what the people do. And now, sparing the king, why would Saul spare the king? Professional courtesy. I mean, if you're the king and you have destroyed the other people and you don't kill their king, that's kind of setting a precedent for if you ever lose. Like, let's have a precedent here in battle that if we lose, we don't kill the other king. All right? So this was not just failure to execute the command to its fullest. It was self-serving disobedience. All right? He doesn't kill the other king because he's a king. The people don't kill all the animals that are good, the best ones. They save the best ones because they want to eat them themselves. So it was self-serving disobedience that was at heart. And because of this, God comes to Samuel. The word of the Lord came to Samuel, and he says, I regret that I made Saul king. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time unpacking this, but theologically, you can spend a lot of time unpacking what it means for God to say, I regret something, because most of us read this and go, wait a second, didn't you know this was going to happen? we kind of have this idea that you knew this was going to happen. But yet, God says, I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands. Samuel was angry. Samuel was not only angry that he had anointed a failed king, but actually it says in the text that Samuel had to carry out the completion of killing the people, and the king of the Amalekites is brought to Samuel, and Samuel kills him himself. It says, rather graphically, it says he hewed him to pieces with his sword. Okay? So Samuel's not real happy with the way this ends, and this is what leads up to our current passage. This is the end of the 15th chapter. This leads us to today's story, but this is the backstory of why they needed a new king. So it's in this context that they just pick up the story with this nice little statement of the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul? All right? So we start here in our passage of the day where God is saying, look, I regretted it, I'm over it, move on. I regretted it, I'm over it, move on. I've made this decision, we're getting a new king. He did not destroy Saul. Saul was alive, he spared Saul's life, he was just removing him from his job. So he's like, I'm firing him, it is your job now, Samuel, to move on and anoint a new king. And this is a lesson for us right here. Sometimes we need to just remember that we need to move on when it's clear that the old path can't be. Now, I love perseverance. It's one of my favorite traits. I absolutely love perseverance. I think perseverance is a wonderful trait to teach. I will wait years, if I have to wait years, in order to get to what I think is right. But the skill we need to be developing is to discern the difference between a tough road and a dead end. If it's a tough road, stay on that road, keep going down that road, persevere, keep fighting. But as soon as you know that this is not a tough road, it's a dead end, be decisive about backing up. As soon as you know that it's a dead end, not a tough road, throw it in reverse, get out of there, and find a different path. And we need to learn to discern the difference between the tough road and the dead end. God says to Samuel, I'll show you what to do. You shall anoint for me the one whom I name to you. It's going to be one of Jesse's sons. Just wait until the one comes and I'll name him. But of course, Samuel, being human, doesn't have that kind of patience, and as soon as the sons begin to come before him, he starts to substitute his judgment for God's, and Eliab comes up and he says, surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord. This guy looks like a king. He looks great. He looks like exactly what you'd put on the cover of King magazine or whatever, okay? He's got the look. Jumps right into judgment. And it's always tempting for us to presume God's choice using our own judgment rather than waiting for God to show us the way. And so often this happens. We ask God for guidance, and then we don't have the patience to wait for it. All right. We ask God for guidance, and we don't have the patience to wait. And when we don't hear the guidance right away, we jump in and substitute our own. And it's really tempting. It happens to me all the time. I pray to God for guidance, and I feel like I'm on customer service hold. Getting that recording that says, your prayer is very important to us. We will be with you shortly. Right. But unlike what I do with Spectrum, I try not to hang up on God. As they say, sometimes God says yes, sometimes God says no, but sometimes God doesn't say anything for a while. And we just need to wait. We just need the patience to wait. So if we've asked for God's guidance, understand that it's going to come on God's timing, and we need to sit back and wait for it to come. Don't push it, don't rush it, and don't substitute your judgment for God's. Wait for it. And then God tells Samuel what his mistake had been. He says, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. Sometimes, whether it's in employment situations or relationship situations, you realize that it wasn't the right person, not the right person for the job, not the right person for your relationship or whatever. But sometimes what happens is that it wasn't so much that it was the wrong person as it was that you had the wrong criteria. Okay. Sometimes you were just looking for the wrong thing. Right? And so often you see businesses do this. I think people have a tendency to reevaluate their criteria more than businesses do. People have a failed relationship, and they sometimes will sit back and think, okay, maybe I was looking for the wrong kind of person. They tend to do that more effectively. Businesses tend to not to. They tend to do that less often. They tend to often have a person, they hire them, it doesn't work out, and then they just use the very same job description that they had used to hire the person to hire the next person, thinking they had gotten the wrong person, without first stepping back and saying, well, maybe it's the wrong criteria. Maybe we're using the wrong criteria. Maybe we're looking for the wrong kind of attributes in people, and we need to remember to make sure that we have the right criteria for what it is that we're looking for. One of the things that does happen in our lives, I think, is sometimes the criteria we focus on are criteria that are built around problems that we're having. Okay, because that's the easiest thing to do. Whether you're a business or whether it's your personal life, you sit there and say, I've got a problem, and everything will be great if I just get rid of the problem. All right, so you have people who sit there and say, well, I'm feeling money problems, so what I really need is to just have more money, and I'll be happy if I have more money, or whatever it is, okay? And often that's really the wrong focus. Eliminating all of your problems is not a guarantee that you're actually going to be happy. Instead, focusing on what it is that makes you happy, what it is that actually moves you towards your goals in life, whatever it is that has more meaning for you. Just stay focused on those things. Stay focused on the positive things. Stay focused on the things that move you toward being the kind of person, having the kind of life you want to have, rather than focusing on the problems that you're having and thinking that if I can just eliminate the problems, everything else falls into place. It doesn't necessarily work that way. You can eliminate all the problems and still not be happy. And God says to Samuel, don't look on this external stuff, because the Lord looks on the heart. Frankly, I think this is pretty obvious for most folks, yet we don't implement it. All right? I've never heard anybody read this verse and say, oh no, this is wrong. The outward appearance is always more important than their character. Okay? I've never heard people say that. Maybe a Hollywood casting agent might. But aside from that, I don't imagine anyone saying that. They all know it. And yet, I don't think we implement it all that well. I mean, for example, one of the areas where I think it's really interesting is in the employment kind of area. Think about your resume. Think about your resume, okay? How much of it actually speaks of your heart and your character, as opposed to the impersonal things like your skills? Okay? So much of it is just about what you can do and not who you are. And yet, at the end of the day, what's on the heart matters in every environment. Character always matters. And you can take people and you can teach them skills for the most part, but it is a lack of character that will destroy people. It's a lack of character that will destroy families. It's a lack of character that will destroy teams. One of the worst mistakes I see in churches all the time is a person gets into a position because they have skills that the church thinks they need, and those skills are good, and they go, well, yes, the person's really impossible to work with. They're not a nice person. Nobody likes this person. Nobody wants to be near this person, but they've got skills, all right, that we need. And we don't know how we would replace those skills if we didn't have that person. I'm like, figure it out. Because the thing you're underestimating is that that person who's a terrible teammate may have great personal skills themselves, but they are ruining the skill level of everyone around them. All right? They're ruining the skill level of everyone around them because you are losing the people who will not work with you because they don't want to work with that person. Everyone else is less motivated. They don't enjoy doing what they do anymore, so they're putting out 80% instead of 100% because of a bad teammate. You have no idea how much that supposedly skilled person is costing your team because they're impossible to work with. Character always matters. Right? Character comes first, and then teach skills. Right? Because I guarantee you that person who's a great teammate, whatever they lack in skills will be made up for by the people they're able to surround themselves with who have skills, who want to work with them, who want to help them, who want to help them get better because they're a person that people want to be around and work with. So character always matters. Always focus on the character of the people who are around you. Character matters, whether it's friendships, romantic relationships, work relationships, every sphere of relationship, character comes first. Look on the inside. Look on the heart, not on the external. And then comes this thing toward the end. All the sons that were with Jesse come by. Jesse appears to be out of sons, and yet none of them were who God named. And here is what I think is Samuel's best expression of trust, and the expression of trust that I would hope all of us would have. Because when all the sons have come by, and none of them were who God named, the temptation is really great to say, okay, let's pick the least bad son. Figure out who is the least bad of these. All right? But the trust in God is when Samuel says to Jesse, are all your sons here? See, none of the sons I've seen are the one who's meant to be king. But you told me, God, that one of Jesse's sons would be the one. So there must be another son. That's the expression of trust. That's the expression of confidence in God, to sit there and say, okay, wait a second, none of these options have looked good, so there must be another. See, in God, there are good options, there are bad options, there are next options, but there aren't last options. If it's not the right option, there's another option. If it's not the right option, look for another option. God is not leaving you without options. If God is leading you down the path that God wants, then when you haven't seen any options that are good, look for the next one. Have the faith to do what Samuel did and say, are these all your sons? There must be another. There must be another. There must be one more. There must be an option I'm not seeing. There must be an option I'm supposed to be waiting for. There must be an option that you haven't yet provided to me because you've led me down this path. You've told me the option is going to be down here, and I've not seen it. I'm not going to jump for the wrong one. I'm not going to go for the least bad one. I'm going to trust that there's another one. You're never out of options with God. And then he sends for this son, this youngest one who is out in the field. And the Lord said, rise and anoint him, for this is the one. And we find out in the next verse that his name is David, the greatest king of Israel. And after all this, after everything Samuel had gone through, anointing Saul, having Saul fail, having to kill King Agag himself, he finally gets to the greatest king of Israel's history, David. And it was all worth it. And that's the thing. No one ever regrets the time, the effort, or the failures that it took to get to the right choice. I've never heard a person say, well, it took so long, why bother? What was the point? I mean, did you love the Oscars last week? I loved the Oscars, seeing Ke Huy Quan and Michelle Yeoh and Jamie Lee Curtis, all of whom, having spent decades in the industry. Ke Huy Quan had given up acting because of the lack of opportunities. Michelle Yeoh went 40 years before she was number one on a call sheet for a movie. Jamie Lee Curtis had been in all these other things. Well, actually, you can't say she had been robbed previously because she was never going to win an Oscar for Halloween. But still, you look at decades doing, I love the way she phrased it, genre movies, okay? And after all of that work, they're not up there saying, I should have had this 20 years ago. I should have had this 30 years ago. No, they're up there saying, it's worth it. All the work, all the effort, all the auditions, all the rejections, all the failures, it was worth it. No one ever regrets the time or the effort or the failures you experience when you finally get to the right place. So in this lesson, we kind of see it all. We see Samuel fail. We see him urged to move on from his failure. We see him urged to have patience in finding the right next choice. And then we see him landing on the exact right choice for the people of Israel and for God's plan. So fail, it's okay. Move on. Wait as long as you need to, because God will show up. And at the end, it's all worth it. Amen.